Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is. Studebaker is.
Appreciate that. All right, I'm going to take this guy out. All right, well, thank you all for being here again with us today. And Andy's right. The genesis for this talk was, if you haven't seen the exhibit yet, it's called Tune In, Cars and Popular Music. The focus is a little bit different than what we're going to look at today, but I highly encourage you all after this to head upstairs in the museum, check it out. We've paired 6 cars with the 6 songs that those cars were mentioned in. So it's a lot of fun. You can listen to the songs, learn about the cars, and check it out. So we're going to take a little bit of a different track today and look at kind of the history of audio and the automobile. These are 2 sort of technologies that I think have been sort of tied together from the very beginning, right? I mean, I can't imagine being in a car and not having music on or some sort of audio. And we all grew up, I mean, in this room. Actually, let's do this. Show of hands. Who kind of grew up listening to 8-track tapes? Okay, a few of you. Cassette tapes. Most of us. CDs, right? So we're gonna get into all that today. But it's a really kind of a neat journey. So we'll go dive in here. So, it'd help if I turn this on. All right. All right, so I have this divided into 2 parts for us here. So part 1, we're going to look at really, I call it a brief history of the car radio, because depending on what you really want to know, it's quite the rabbit hole to go down. But we're really going to go back to the very beginning, meaning really turn of the century, the very early automobiles. I'll take us through really today, right, the modern era of sort of infotainment screen, touch screens, and all the fun technology we have in the cars we're driving today. And like I said, I mean, we'll really see a lot of these technologies, innovations kind of mirror each other as kind of the decades go along. So we're going to go, like I said, all the way back to the beginning. And this might be an odd place to start, on immediate, when you look at this here. But so the image is here. The image on the left is actually the Studebaker Pavilion at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, Missouri in 1904. And so I'm mentioning this because this was a fairly big exposition. We had a lot of major American companies exhibiting here. Obviously, Studebaker putting their full foot forward here, all their different vehicles on display. This is some poster artwork here on the right from the exposition. This is an interesting time, 1904. So we have Studebaker selling their horse-drawn vehicles. We also have other exhibitors at the fair promoting a lot of new products, right? A lot of new technologies that hadn't been really showcased before. So go to the next slide here. And some of those gentlemen are Lee DeForest. We also have Guglielmo Marconi. You may have heard of Marconi before. So this is, we have some early experiments in wireless broadcasting, right? Wireless telegraphy. And so Lee DeForest was an early innovator in this era. So he had formed the American DeForest Wireless Telegraphy Company with the stated goal, right, of what he called worldwide wireless, right? And so this tower, in the image in the center here, was a giant broadcasting tower he installed at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Again, these are really just highly visible promotions, right? You're never going to get a bigger crowd than you might get at one of these World's Fairs. And so you see men like Marconi, like DeForest, some other innovators like Nikola Tesla, Ernst Alexandrian, all these guys sort of doing a lot of these high-profile experiments at these World's Fairs. And so a couple years later, DeForest also, he did one of the first ship-to-ship sort of wireless broadcasts, right, in 1907. So we have an excerpt here from around that time, a couple years later in 1910. So you'll see, I mean, this was big news, right? You see articles talking about the technology, to broadcast these early radio signals, right? This was a big deal. If people on shore could listen to an opera, for example, right? From a listening station on shore or on a boat. And so a lot of this stuff made headlines. And so the technology was still very much in its infancy, but people found this, of course, really fascinating. It's almost magical, right? Like, how are we hearing things wirelessly, right? So this was kind of the genesis of what will become a radio, right? And we'll get to how that gets into the automobile in just a second. All right, so a few more images here. And I should have mentioned, DeForest, his real big role, as you can see in this image here, he developed one of the first vacuum tubes, what he called the Audion tube, right? And that was what really allowed the radio, as we know it, to kind of fully evolve, right? The audion tube allowed for the detection and amplification of weak radio signals, which is important. And again, I mentioned these gentlemen at the outset because this is sort of the proof of concept, right, of some of these technologies. All right. So like I said, I could do a whole talk probably on the early days of radio here. On the left, this is a great example of an early crystal radio set. This was kind of an early radio where you would, I guess, sit around your table and you had to listen to with an actual headset, right? There weren't speakers yet. Here's an example of an early vacuum tube, an audion tube from the collections at the Henry Ford. Again, we have Lee DeForest image there. And then on this side here, again, an early example of a home radio set, right? So these would have come into play like in the late 19-teens, early 1920s. And it's interesting, right, because, again, early on you would have had to use headphones or some sort of device to project the sound, right? So imagine like a loudspeaker, like an early phonograph, right, to project the sound out. Eventually you have speakers with radios with built-in speakers and tuners and everything kind of in one nice cabinet, right? And these came along in the 1920s. All right, so where does car audio come into this? All right, so kind of a neat photo here. So there were two ways you could do this early on, right? And we're talking really in the 1920s here. The image on the right, this is just some fantastic image from, again, the collections of the Henry Ford, of a couple here who kind of rigged up their own radio for their car. So you can see on the hood is an antenna. They have sort of, again, a phonograph speaker there or horn attached to, I would assume, an amplifier, all sorts of wiring. This is how you would have done it, right, before you could have radio installed in your car. I can't imagine many people did this, but if you were intrepid enough, I guess you could do it. And that's radio. But again, we do have physical media players. So this is actually we have this one on display upstairs in the exhibit. This is a Stargenet portable phonograph, courtesy of my colleague Jack. He's got a great record collection. And so this is another way you could have brought music with you, right? So you could have had this in your car. I would imagine you'd probably want to stop because it's using a needle, right? But you could have listened to music in your car that way. So, all right. So we really kind of get into it here with this gentleman here. This is Paul Galvin and his brother Joseph. They started the Galvin Manufacturing Company in Chicago in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And the Galvins were largely responsible for really making car radios affordable, right? I mean, that's how any new technology, right? The prototype comes along, right? Then someone comes along and makes it better, makes it cheaper, so that more people can afford it. So what Galvin did, and this is how Studebaker plays into it a little bit, created a system. Anybody know the system, one of their early commercial radio systems, what they named it? Any guesses? You know it. It was the Motorola, right? So Moto, because that just kind of seemed like, car, things, whatever, auto-related. And then Rolla thought it sounded like the motion, dynamic. So Motorola was the name of their first radio system. So at the time, before they introduced their first Motorola system, a radio would cost about $250 in, let's say, 1926, 1927. A comparable vehicle, let's say a new model, Ford Model A, right, 1928, was about $500 to $600, right, depending on what you got. So that's half the price of the car. And so, again, they're experimenting with this technology. The story goes, he actually introduced the Motorola 5T71 in 1930. So he drove a Motorola-equipped Studebaker, okay, to the 1930 Radio Manufacturer Show. He wasn't an exhibitor. He just parked on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and let the system run, and people would walk by and were able to, hey, what's that thing? That sounds cool. I want one. So he was sort of viral marketing at this show in 1930. So again, his business grew from there. You can tell they started all sorts of fun promotional ways to spread the word about their system. So we have the Galvin Manufacturing Company here, could install your car radio for you. I'm assuming, but the vehicle could drive around to you and install it in your car. So period advertisements. Let's go here. Here we go. period advertisements were really stressing the fact that these were relatively easy to install. You still needed a professional, right, to do it, but the cost had come down significantly in just a couple of years, from the late 20s into the early 30s. And so there were multiple components to this system. You can kind of see in the ad in the center in the bottom here. You know, we have a battery, you have the antenna or aerial, the receiver, the speaker, and of course the sort of head unit, the tuner, right? But you can see how far the price had dropped from even just 1930. The Motorola Deluxe system here in 1932 is just $69.50, while the standard is $49.50. So still significant, but much more affordable if you're, you know, buying a new car or just want to install this in your car. And so again, as we go along, these are things you would have had you know, folks install for you. The Galvins did sort of pursue some of these strategic partnerships with automakers in the 1930s during the Depression. So Ford began offering Motorola's pre-installed at their factory around this time. B.F. Goodrich began selling their systems in their chain of tire stores in 1934. And so it kind of took off from there, right? So you look at the early to mid 30s as kind of the radio becoming a little bit more popular in cars. Over here? Yeah, I love this cartoon. It's a good question. I'm trying to remember the origins of this, and I want to say that it came down to advertisements, you know what I mean? And so advertisers saw the radio as an opportunity to, again, promote their products, and so it became another avenue to do that. And so there was just kind of scuffle at the legislative level about, you know, manufacturers and advertisers and legislatures. So kind of a neat cartoon there. And then just a cool illustration on the left there of that gentleman trying to install his own radio in his car. So, and that fact is kind of interesting. By the end of the Depression, about 1 in 5 Americans had a car radio. So, let's try this again. There we go. All right, so just a couple of examples of some early units here. We have 2 manufacturers really who were making radios at scale. We talked about Motorola. Philco is another one you'll see quite a bit. So we have this sort of Philco sign there on the left. Galvin, one of their early models here on the top. And again, another Philco. It's called the Philco Transitone Model 10 from 1933. A lot of these are from vintage radio websites, so you can certainly check those out. But you can see a lot of times you had a lot of the electrical components contained in this box that would have been installed in your car. And then at this point, the head unit, I guess, right, the volume knobs, tuning knob would have been mounted on your steering column, right? So you would have had a unit right next to the steering wheel on the steering column, so you had kind of easy access to change the station or what have you. And the 20s through the 30s, too, you see, again, the radio broadcasting as we know it really evolving. And so you had a few more options than you would have, let's say, in the teens or 20s. And if you're curious about some of these, there's a great website called retroradioshop.com that you can kind of look through different makes and models and what radios were available in different cars. All right. So again, as we kind of continue on from the 30s into the 1940s, you see some of these steering column mounted units evolving into what we're more familiar with today, with the radio kind of in the dash there. Taking a much more prominent place kind of in the real estate of your dashboard in your car. And so this is a nice example of a 1940 President Club sedan we have upstairs on display. And again, another stat here, by 1946 there were about 9 million AM car radios in use. That's pretty substantial in just 10 or 15 years. It's become a little more common and expected to have a new car anyway, have a radio in it. And so in terms of design, again, more attention and thought is being given to how these things look in the car. Again, I mean, a lot of the units were the same. A lot of automakers then would kind of customize, you know, the actual layout and then the knobs and all that good stuff, right? So everyone looks a little bit different, but they were largely the same. Let's go to the next slide here. All right, and just kind of a quick science lesson. I'm sure a lot of us know this or have seen the electromagnetic spectrum or know, but we have AM radio. See if I can get my laser here. AM radio kind of on the left here, and then FM, some of the higher wavelength broadcasts on the right. And so just to show you that these are different, different places on the electromagnetic, or on the spectrum here. And so a lot of us, you'll see in a lot of the radios we'll look at, you'll see a little 5-4 on the dial. And of course, that's the 540 kilohertz, right? That represents kind of the far end of the AM band there. So, so AM, again, these are different methods for transmitting radio signals. It's really just how they're encoded and how the information is carried on that wave. So that's the big difference. So FM generally offers better quality and is less susceptible to interference, while AM can travel longer because the waves are larger. So our little science lesson for the day. All right. A couple more Studebaker radios. So we have a 1953 Starliner, Champion Starliner on the left there. Here's a 56 Golden Hawk. And so you start to see the integration here of speakers, like right below sometimes the knobs here and the tuner. So you can see we have the 5-4 here all the way through the band. And that's pretty common. Go to the next slide here. And we know what car, it's labeled, I guess I was going to ask you, but this is the 1956 Packard Predictor. So even in show cars, right, you'll still see, the radio taking a prominent place kind of on the console or the dash there. So, AM radio, obviously standard equipment in cars even through today, despite some folks wanting to get rid of AM radio. And of course, we can't talk about AM without talking about FM. And so there was a German company, Blaupunkt, introduced the first FM radios for cars in 1952. And then we see the first sort of AM/FM systems come out in the 1950s. We also see in the 1950s this transition from vacuum tubes to transistor radios, which allows radios to be smaller, more compact. Anybody know the first factory supplied FM radio in the U.S.? What car? Any guesses? Not a Cadillac. Close. Lincoln. It was a Lincoln. Yeah, it was a Lincoln. Yeah, 58 Lincoln models had the first factory-installed FM radios. So a couple more images here in our part one. Oop, I don't want to skip ahead here. So this is an ad for new 1964 Studebakers. You can see they have the fully integrated AM/FM radios here. And I call this out too because you get the 50s into the 60s, they are giving a little more thought to the sort of the in-car audio experience, right? And so we don't yet have like speakers or systems that can truly deliver like what we would consider quality sort of audio in the vehicle. But again, you can see Studebaker called out this rear seat speaker. The rear seat speaker operating in unison with the radio speaker provides a stereophonic type tone quality that's a pleasure to hear. And so you see, again, more attention being paid to the radio, but also just kind of, again, the whole, audio experience in the car. So this on the right here is an ad. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but it is interesting. Studebaker promoting in the in 1940 their shortwave tuners, right? And so this would, it's another technology that would have allowed you to bring in sort of broadcasts from all over the world, right? And so this would have been an option, right, to upgrade to the shortwave tuner in your vehicle. So, all right, just a couple of other really neat ads. I think just just bringing some more attention to the style of some of the radios at the time. So we have just a nice example. They called this is the 1950s, the Starline Micromatic Tuning Radio or the Stratoline Micromatic Tuning Radio. So you can say this one has I believe 6 tubes, this has 8 tubes, and so these again would have been options you would have had in your new Studebaker. So, all right. So part 2, we're going to look a little more closely how we kind of came from this to this. This is not my picture, but this is my car. Weirdly enough, this is from a 2022 Honda Accord. At first glance, it's they're not so different, but now obviously we have a lot more control and a lot more customization and ability to kind of listen to what we want to listen to. And we'll get into that here in just a second. All right, so part 2, vinyl 8-track CDs, oh my. The more you get into this, it's pretty interesting how far we've come, I think, in just 50, 60, 70 years in terms of physical media and what we can listen to in our vehicles. A lot of folks are surprised to know that there were early attempts to play vinyl records in cars. This is not a very good idea. But it held on for several years, and so this is a great ad here. It was a Plymouth Accessories booklet talking about, again, an early attempt to what they call their highway hi-fi player, right? This operated through the car radio. This would have been in 1956 through the late 1950s. According to their sales literature, a choice of classical and popular recordings and even readings on selected subjects are available for listening pleasure. And so you would have, again, put the 45, I guess, into the slot there, but you were able to control it from your radio dial. There are many reasons why this wasn't a great idea beyond the fact that you would have had to physically stop and exchange the record out. You're traveling on sometimes bumpy roads with the needle going like this. They did develop some technology to accommodate for that, but it's still tough. So this technology did not last a whole long time. There was a Consumer Reports article from 2014. The author, Sharon Riley, said, car record players were the infotainment systems of the 1950s and 60s. New technology freed drivers from commercials and unreliable broadcast signals, allowing them to be masters of their motoring soundtrack. So that's kind of an interesting point, right? So now you had the flexibility to kind of listen to what you wanted to and weren't kind of tethered to whatever was on the radio. So it's still an important step forward. And I also have another image here. So this is kind of fun. So this is a 1958 Simca. It's a French automobile or automaker. And so this is called their Marley record player. So similar concept. This would have been debuted at the 1958 Paris Auto Show. Studebaker Packard, I believe, had a presence there with Raymond Loewy, but this was on a French car. So it's interesting, but as we all know, we don't have record players in our car today, so it didn't stick around. All right, so next is the ubiquitous 4 and 8-track cartridges. We've all seen 8-track players. There's no point showing you, so I just picked some cool albums from the Henry Ford. It's funny, my dad and I we were at their house for Easter, and I was like, Dad, I need to put some 8-tracks on display for this music exhibit at the museum. And he's like, okay, I'm going to dig out my 8-tracks. And so we found it in the garage, and it's not climate controlled. It's just in a musty garage. And, the good thing about 8-tracks and a lot of cassettes, they'll just play, right? It just played. And so we listened to, I think, the Blues Brothers soundtrack and other stuff. Anyway, so these are around. I mean, these still have their fans today. This was, again, a pretty great innovation. We have originally 4 and then 8-track audio cassettes. And these were developed really in the mid-'60s, right? We think about them, I think, more kind of as a 70s technology, but they did come around in the 60s. And the 8-track was a big leap forward in terms of the technology. We have an endless loop magnetic tape technology designed to be used in cars, so it is portable. We can argue its portability today, but again, you can hold it in your hand, right? You can store them in your car. You can play, pull it, play it. It's easy. It's easy to switch between tracks, and they're pretty robust, So for all these reasons, I think the 8-track had quite a long life. These were originally not factory installed. Some automakers did include them as higher priced options starting in like the mid to late 60s. I think the 1966 Mustang, for example, you could have had a factory installed 8-track player. But you've probably seen them as, in cars like installed under the dash, or sometimes they were in the console or whatever. They were typically pretty affordable. Some models you could have even combined with an AM/FM radio, right? So it was all kind of one unit. So they were around for a while. And of course, we probably all remember what sort of supplanted them. Well, here's a couple of other kind of fun ads. Here's a newspaper ad for some Craig 8-track players and a newspaper here. Again, this very, very 70s advertisement here on the right from Motorola. Again, Motorola is still the name of the game for a long, long time. But again, yeah, you too can install an 8-track player in your car and ride a pink cloud with your cool bell bottoms. So there you go. So yeah, we see a lot of these being advertised here in the 60s and 70s. All right, so we go on to the cassette, right? Well, actually, before we get there, also in the 70s, you really, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but we start to see more attention and technology is evolving to the point where like stereos are becoming kind of, again, this is a aftermarket or separate companies popping up, right, to create car stereos. And so I think you see the evolution, right? We're all very we take it for granted today. We buy cars with factory installed nice stereo systems, but in the 1970s, you start to see more and more of these companies get into the stereo game with different systems that you could have installed in your car. So. Got to press harder. There we go. All right. All right. So the mighty cassette. I think we could talk a lot about this. I think, my personal opinion, I think the cassette probably had the longest staying power. I mean, I still know people today who have cassette tapes in their cars or adapters. I think they were even more portable in many ways than 8-track players. The cassette cartridge actually goes back to 1964. But it really took a decade for them to be kind of replaced, for them to replace 8-tracks. So we have Philips, right? I believe that ad on the left there is Philips, yep. Philips introduced one of the first successful in-dash cassette players. Anybody want to guess the year? Is the year on there? I can't remember. Oh yeah, I do say that, 1968. So again, late 1960s, these are on the market. But really, it was one product which I think launched the sort of ubiquity, the cassette into the marketplace. This is the Sony Walkman, right? This is Sony Walkman 2 on the right. But again, this is in the early 1980s, and it was a Sony Walkman that really, and its appearance in popular culture, that made cassette tapes just kind of go everywhere. And so then we see more and more cars come with factory-installed cassette players. Again, cassettes were a little bit more robust than 8-tracks. They could be easily rewound and fast-forwarded. Companies like Dolby introduced noise reduction, all these things to improve sound quality, kind of, again, to enhance that in-car audio experience. I did want to also note, I don't have a slide on it, but you have the introduction of mixtapes, right? I mean, we all love mixtapes, and so cassettes were kind of that first iteration, right, of like, oh, I'm going to create my own soundtrack and impress my girlfriend. There you go, right, in the cassette tape. All right, and like I said, late 70s, early 80s, we see a lot of improvements in automakers realizing the importance of good in-car audio systems. We have multi-speaker systems with amplifiers. This is also like when we see manufacturers, like some of you are probably familiar with, like Kenwood, Sony, Pioneer, start to, and a lot of Japanese companies, right, releasing these systems to the U.S. market, entering the car stereo market. All right. A couple more just examples of the cassette. And so just some newspaper ads, right, of the different systems you could buy. I love this in the middle here. I've never seen this particular dash, but this is a 1990 Ford Sierra CLX, but it's even got storage for your cassettes right here. And so you start to see automakers playing around with different, different head units, right, with different functionality, with the ability to store the media in the car and all this fun stuff. So, all right, of course, after the cassette, we have the CD, right? This is what I grew up with, right? We had cassette players in our cars, but when I came of age, it was all CDs. My friends carried the giant albums, in their cars with CDs. Some had, the really cool kids had like the 8-disc changer in their trunk. I never had that. But again, this is a pretty new technology here. We're talking the early 1980s. So we have the first commercial CD player in a car in 1984. We have Sony's ad here, right? So please accept Sony's sincerest apology for making all car stereos obsolete. There you go. Took a few years, obviously. I think they were a pretty expensive system through the 1980s until automakers started making them pretty standard in cars in the 1990s. Of course, as the technology evolves, you still have your old media, right? And so along the way, we'll look at a couple other examples, is sort of the secondary market of just adapters, right? And so I remember fondly having a tape adapter taped to CD, so you'd have the CD player, portable CD player in the car with your cassette tape adapter. Didn't really work great, but that's what we had. And so, yeah, so the CD obviously lasted quite a long time. Does anybody want to take a guess on the our last car with a factory-installed CD player? It's not a Honda. You're close, kind of, but Acura. Not Acura. It's a Subaru. It was the 2023 Subaru Forester. It was the last car with a factory CD player. So no new car you're going to buy today has a CD player, which is weird to me still, but we've come a long way. All right, and it was actually Mercedes was the first automaker to offer factory-installed CD players. So some of you may have heard of the Becker Mexico, pretty famous, well-designed CD player from the mid-1980s. A couple of other ads here. Obviously, for a long time in the early 2000s, that's what we had, right? Store our CDs in these cool sleeves there. And then, of course, just another ad here from the 90s with Craig, JVC, Jensen, Alpine, all these cool head units, and they had cool lights and just other ways to listen to CDs in your car. So the 90s and kind of that transition to the millennium were also really interesting. You had more thought given to what I'm calling all-in-one integration here, and so these are not great pictures, but just showing you where we take this for granted now because we're so used to kind of all these systems working together and it looking good. But we see the introduction of a lot of these, your climate control, obviously your radio control, any physical media. They're often appearing in one nicely designed unit here in your car. And so, as the 2000s dawned, we see kind of that evolution from these type of units into, again, not always touch screens yet, but digital screens that have some programmability and other functions. So quite a transition there in the early 2000s. I mentioned, some of the adapters. Again, we're looking at 2000s, kind of into the early 2010s. The iPod debuted in 2003, 2004, I want to say. Obviously, many of us don't have iPods anymore, but for many years, this was the de facto digital sort of media player. Obviously, other companies made them too. It wasn't just Apple. But again, this was another type of media you could plug into your car. We have the very famous aux cord that would plug into your dash. Sometimes you could even, early Bluetooth wasn't always great, the sound quality, but you could you could have an adapter using Bluetooth through the car radio, play one of your digital files, right? And so it's kind of amazing just to track all this stuff and how technology has just made it possible to work with all the new media players. So, of course, we have the 2000s. We have satellite radio. This was the thing for a few years. It was like people who wanted kind of the uninterrupted play, right? No ads. Kind of again, listen to what they want. This was a great option around 2000. I think 2001 was the first satellite radio system or player, I guess, XM satellite radio, and then Sirius satellite radio, and they integrated. Now it's Sirius XM. A lot of people still listen to satellite radio. You still can. You can subscribe. I feel like it has its diehards, but I think most people now have so many options. Why bother? But it is still a thing. And that brings us really from the satellite radio age into the 2010s, even through today. So I'm going to run through what are just a very few examples of streaming services that I'm sure many of you have in your car. Spotify, all through your phone, right? Pandora, we have Android Auto, we have Apple CarPlay, Apple Music, those are the Apple Podcast, Audible, Amazon Music, Google Maps. When you see them on a screen like this, you're like, yeah, that's a lot. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, these are just a small sample of the most popular services, but it's in some ways it's a golden age, right, of what you can and want to listen to in your car. And so, like I said, I listen to a lot of Spotify and podcasts, but I mean, this combined with radio really gives you literally endless, options as to what you can and want to listen to in your car. And this was just a really great report I found, a study done by Edison Research from a couple of years ago. And so it's just, they were looking, and this is primarily focusing on ad space, but they found that most people the majority still listen to AM, FM radio kind of over other types of in-car audio options. I don't know I assume that number has gone down in the last couple of years. But again, everyone's a little bit different as to kind of what their tastes are. The most interesting part of this whole thing is Why they have music videos on there from YouTube, I'm assuming that's everybody who's in the car, not just the driver, because that seems really dangerous. But again, YouTube is another source of music and all that. So just an interesting study done. So it's a really interesting mix of where people are getting their audio from. So last thing I want to kind of share with us, like what is the future, right? It's hard to know. I mean, some people have been, obviously technology changes quite often, but we can imagine it's going to get more immersive, right? It'll be a little more sort of driver focused, right? You'll have more the ability to control kind of everything in your car audio system, more integrated. We already, I think, have voice activated control, all that kind of stuff, but it'll become even more integrated into your car system. More personalized to you. Obviously now much of what we listen to is customized. You can curate your own playlists on Spotify, and again, podcasts and all these things. And eco-friendly, right? Automakers are still thinking about how to make a lot of these technologies and manufacturing a little more eco-friendly. But it's an open question, right? I think audio will always be a part of the driving experience, the in-car experience. Where we go from here, who knows? But yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. So that is all I have for us today, and I would be happy to take any questions if you have them. So thank you. Lauren, you can hit the lights. All right. All right. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
How far do you think AI is going to be integrated in?
Different by design. Studebaker is, Studebaker is, Studebaker is.